Welcome everyone to the Diary of the CIO session. I'm Joe, I'm one of the account managers at Peak. I'm responsible for our accounts in the construction and CPG verticals. Today, excited to be joined by one of my customers who likes to keep me particularly busy, Mark, who's CIO at Speedy. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
I don't know whether I can do any more justice than Holly did there. So I'm Mark, I'm the CIO at Speedy. Been there just coming up for 9 years now. Sit on our executive board, report to the chief exec. He's my third chief exec in the 9 years. I'm the only one that survived the middle chief exec. What that says about me or him, I'm not really sure. I've got a team of about 100 people, primarily based in the UK and a little bit over in Jordan.
Nice. And as a bit of an intro to the session, I think we'd all agree that digital transformation can be really tough. And maybe you're here because you're considering starting your AI journey, or perhaps you've nailed your first use case and you're considering executing another initiative on your roadmap. In any case, I think there's a lot to be learned from Mark's experience. So Speedy have entered into a strategic partnership with Peak, and they're undergoing a significant transformation. This means Mark's responsible for 6 simultaneous AI initiatives in different parts of the business that are all interconnected. And that's pretty impressive. So I really can't think of a better person to talk to us through how commercial and technical teams and leaders can work together to deliver transformational AI. So thanks for joining me, Mark. Ready to get stuck in? Okay, let's start with some context then. Can you tell us a bit about Speedy and the digital transformation you're undergoing?
Okay, so Speedy's a tool hire company primarily, based in the UK, a little bit in Kazakhstan. We've got about 500 million turnover. We've got about 3,500 staff, mainly in the UK and Ireland. We operate out of around 200 locations, just short of that. And they range from 2 or 3 man operations to 150 to 180 man operations. So very, very varied in the size. We've got a very varied product mix. So we go from a 500 kVA generator through to some fancy rail clipping machines that are really niche and bespoke to the rail industry, down to a hand drill and a whacker plate that people would actually use as a consumer at home. And the basis of our customer then is therefore very, very varied as well. So we go from a Balfour Beatty, who may spend 25 million a year with us, to Mrs. Miggins, who hires a wet vac once a year. So there's a complete disparity in what we do in terms of product range and the customer base that we have. In terms of our digital journey, we've been on a bit of a digital journey for quite some time, but we formalized it in the last year, and we've created a strategy which we've called Velocity, which is about taking us quickly to where we want to get to. But this is going to be a 3 to 5 year journey that we've embarked on. We accept, and the previous chief exec, I spoke about being on a third chief exec. The previous one was always about the next 6 months, the next 6 months, the next 6 months. We've got a new one in now who's looking a lot further forward. We're trying to position what we need to do over 3 to 5 years to try and deliver a full digital transformation to the business. And we're into about halfway through year 1 of that at the moment.
Nice. And I've been on this journey with Speedy since I started at Peak around 3 years ago. I'm sure you'd agree those have been the best 3 years, Mark. But I know that you've been at this much longer than me. So if you were to rewind 5 years, how would you describe old school Speedy?
So I think we're still old school in a lot of respects, but we were even older school then. What we had 5 years ago was the 200 locations just treated themselves as individual businesses. So they all had their own revenue target. So they would hoard kit in their locations, and they would service any of the customers that they wanted to from that location. So once we started looking into the data, we could actually map, because we've got Masternaut on our vehicles. People were driving 100 miles to deliver something to a customer because they retained the revenue. So it was all about their little business. Everything was in their area, and they wanted everything to be for themselves. So what that drove was that they hoarded kit. We had far too much kit, and the kit was in the wrong place to where the customer demand was. So it made us massively inefficient in terms of servicing our customers, and it also made us inefficient in terms of how much kit we had to hold. So we had too much kit in the wrong place, in summary, is where we were.
How did that sort of impact the performance metrics that you're looking at as well?
So from a financial performance metric, it meant that our return on capital was lower than it should have been because we had too much kit to be able to service our customer. We measure everything in terms of utilization, so how much of the kit is actually on hire. So we were down at about 45% by net book value of our kit was actually on hire. That's now over 60%. So we've been on a big journey to try and improve that. And if you think that 45 to 60 doesn't sound an awful lot, but in terms of a percentage increase, it's a massive increase in terms of that percentage that gives us a much better return on capital employed.
So you knew there was a problem, but what were really the triggers that led you to strive to do something differently?
I think we were trying to become more data-led than we previously were. We had a culture of spreadsheets within the organisation. So people would send out on a Friday afternoon, they'd all wait for this one spreadsheet to come out from one guy. And the new chief exec came in and he said, this is ridiculous. I get 3 different spreadsheets with 3 different numbers on. So we were on this journey then to say, right, how do we standardise all of this, get all of the data in one place and don't make it so people can manipulate it with Excel. Make it so they get it pushed to them in terms of a data report or a dashboard or something that they can drill into, but they can't actually change the data. So that sort of drove a behavioural change. And once we'd done that, we sort of said, well, how do we now use all of this morass of data that we've collected to try and work out how we should stock our locations? So what we had at the time was a guy, and twice a year was all that we could do it. He'd lock himself in a cupboard for about 2 weeks and come out of the cupboard with this massively complex spreadsheet that said, right, that's where we're going to move all the kit to. And then there'd be this massive movement of all the kit around the business. And our business is very seasonal. So we do that when we're going into the summer season and we do it going into the winter season. And that was just not enough because when you looked at it, there was far more nuances to the data that said, where should we actually hold this kit? And so that was the sort of trigger. And the other one was that we knew we needed to change our customer promise. So, and we couldn't do it by the way in which we were currently working. So we offered a 4-hour delivery service, or we give people a week's free hire nationally across the UK and Ireland, and nobody else in industry does anything like that. Some people have just, probably 5 years into our journey of doing this, moved to a same-day delivery service, but nobody else still offers the 4-hour window that we do. So they were the sort of triggers in terms of customer promise and the unproductivity of the kit.
Yeah, those triggers definitely sound really similar to what I hear from some of my other customers. So siloed data in different systems that don't speak to each other, so they end up exporting it in Excel. Then they rely on one very smart person with one very big spreadsheet, which creates a bottleneck of information. And while that's all going on, there's this sort of underlying itch that continuing to work in that way really isn't going to be competitive in this new world of AI. So that's what really drives them to make the change. You obviously understood that earlier than most, Mark. You're a first mover in your industry. Why did you personally want to use AI?
I don't think we got to the conclusion that we wanted to use AI. We just knew we couldn't do it ourselves. We knew that we couldn't continue like this. So I met Richard 6 years ago. We had a discussion. We gave him the extent of the problem. Richard ran away, got some of his clever people to have a look at it, and presented it back to us that said, I think, or we think, as in Peak think, that you can do this with your data. So it wasn't really called AI at the time. I think it was just intelligence around what it was we were actually trying to do. So it wasn't a formal us embarking on an AI strategy. It was us embarking on a solution to solve our problem, which was this complex data set that we've encountered. It was very embryonic at the time from Peak. They were a new organisation and you didn't have the platform and you didn't have all of these things at the time, but you had a number of clever people and a concept and an idea that sort of resonated with what we wanted to do. Yeah.
And I guess when you went back to the business with this big idea, how did they first react when you introduced it?
Very, very sceptical. A couple of comments that were made to me, you can't mix concrete with a spreadsheet, lad. That's the kind of approach that these people gave. They just thought that they knew so much better about, you can't tell me, I've been in this depot for 20 years, no computer can tell me how much kit we need. And they all had this concept that the more kit you put into the depot, the higher the revenue would go. So trying to disprove those factors to actually tell them, no, you can set the data can tell you these things because these signals that you can't tell. And one of the big issues, though, was around that we didn't capture lost hire data. So we had the data that told us exactly what we transacted, and I think we gave Rich about 4 years worth of data to start with, but there was big holes in that data. And the one big hole is when somebody came into our depot and said, have you got a left-handed hammer? We went, no, we don't do left-handed hammers, mate. We never recorded that. So all of that lost hire was never, ever captured. So that was the one big hole that we still really haven't quite got over.
And perhaps when the initial rollout, we were quite bullish and perhaps presented early iterations too early to some of the users.
Yeah, I think that was a mistake that we made, in that when you look at the raw data, you don't really understand the nuances of the business. So the first presentation that came back, which would probably shout at me for telling you, was, right, what you need to do is sell all your lighting towers in September because they've not been on hire for 6 months. We're like, well, no, they go on hire in the winter because the clocks change and everyone did. So the total extent of the data wasn't understood. So we needed to, and we presented that back to the data chief operating officer. And I'm like, oh no, I can't believe we've done this. But they got it, and they could see that 90% of what we were actually saying was right, but we needed to educate the people on what the actual data set was saying. And as I explained at the start, the complexity of the data set is really, really challenging. And the other thing that it did tell us was that it actually pointed to signals in our business that it wasn't related to the stocking levels that was the issue. The issue was our ability to replenish the kit back to the levels that they should be. So it was something that we didn't know, but the data actually told us that. So trying to then educate our people and make them understand that this is what the data was telling us was the challenge that we had early on.
Definitely. And just reading here that I think when we were presenting some of the initial stuff, perhaps it wasn't the model itself that was inaccurate, but the underlying data. Correct. And the anomalies in that. And that was sort of a continuous process to test and learn and correct to get the inputs to the model much accurate, so the outputs could therefore be reliable.
Yeah, I think there was the complexity and the accuracy were the two things. Yeah. Because the way in which we transact, if somebody came into a location to ask for a certain tool, there may be another tool that could do the job. And so whilst you are hiring this one out rather than this one, you'd never build that linkage between the two without education. So all of those iterative processes to try and do that was the knowledge increase. And also there's this issue of, well, why have you actually hired that one out and not the other one? So there's a lot of vagaries in our data that we needed to try and iron through. And we're still going through that process now.
Yeah. We've talked you through a few challenges and obstacles there. How have you approached overcoming them? To unpack that further.
It's an ongoing education with our people. That the real success we had was when everyone was skeptical and said, those levels are wrong, we can't do it, we need more than that. The way that we demonstrated what we actually were doing was to give them hard evidence that says, here's the data that says, these are all the transactions you've had in the last 4 years from your location. And here's the actual where we've set the levels. So once in 4 years, you hired out more than 4 of those. So why do you need 10? And they couldn't argue with it. And I said, well, okay, I sort of get that. And then they'd say, well, if I can have 4 all the time and I open my doors in the morning for my depot and I've got 4, I'm happy. Well, the problem that you get with the complexity we have is the nuances of the hire industry is that things go out on hire and they come back from hire, and we don't know when they're going to come back from hire. So it may go out, because if you hire a car, generally people hire it for a fortnight. If you hire a cement mixer or a digger, you just hire it for an indefinite period. So what we were doing was moving lots of kit around the country based around estimated return dates, and a lot of that accuracy needs built in over time. So that was another challenge that, again, we're still working through that because of the complexity of the hire transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think recently we've explored methods for tackling the lost hires problem as well, and sort of building more fat into the model to account for some of those nuances.
We're still not capturing this lost hire data. So the way we've asked Pete to do that is to actually take all of the data that we've got and look at other signals in there that would generate, is it actually likely to have generated a lost hire in that period? So if we didn't have any, and historically there has been periods of demand for that, you could assume, rightly or wrongly, that there's a lost hire in there, and fed all of that data into the system as well, which we've just completed that. I think I haven't seen that, but wait to see what that tells us.
In summary, then, I think it's fair to say that overcoming some of these challenges required a really pragmatic approach of trial and error, and this a much longer term view. And I guess a bit of an acceptance that the solution isn't going to be perfect at the start. There will be some resistance to change, And that's why having or working with our data scientists and our AI adoption managers, collaborating with them very closely between both teams on a daily basis to keep making small steps in the right direction has been really, really important to the continuous success of the partnership. And you remain the champion for AI at Speedy, Mark, and I think there's a lot of people in the audience today wearing the same hat who might be planning to go back to their exec team and really share what they've learned today. What advice would you give those people in the audience?
Just to do it. I think quite straightforward. I actually wrote a note down when I was considering this, and it's a bit weird because it's Richard's strapline for the day that every business needs an AI capability. So I wrote that down, and then it was your strapline as well. So they do, whether your boss thinks they need it now. I think you've heard a lot of people talk today about what's going to be in 3 and 5 years' time, and these things do take time. You can't just plug it in and it all works. So the sooner you start the journey, you might not get a return in your first year because you're still building the data integrations, you're building the knowledge, you're building all of the capability on both sides of the equation, but you do need to do it. And if you don't, you'll miss out, because we've heard from so many people today that says it's going to be absolutely essential that AI is embedded within businesses. And you do need your own. You can't get it off the shelf. So start to educate upwards in terms of the benefit to your chief execs and others.
Yeah. Having adopted the AI, what impact has that had on the business? What have really been your biggest wins?
So we talked a little bit about the utilization rate going from high 40s to early 60s, which has been great. The measure that we try and look for nirvana, which is that we get more revenue from having less kit and then therefore less net book value. So that is your financial metrics that come out of the back of it. You're not going to get that everywhere, because actually some of the areas where you're seeing, I'm getting more revenue, so I'm going to put more kit in, like the flywheel effect, and then drive it more and more that you've got. So as long as the revenue's going up and the utilization is high, the net book value can increase because you're going to get a return. The opposite end of the equation, if your revenue's going down and you've got more kit, you've got a problem that you need to deal with, and that's generally via disposal. So that's the main one from our side in terms of the financial metrics, and we have improved our return on capital employed by quite a number of points over the 4 or 5 years that we've been doing this properly. And then we do retain this unmatched service promise. So this 4-hour delivery nationally is in place, and as I said earlier, nobody competes with that. And we have given a very small number of weeks free hires on the back of us being unable to do this on the basis that we've got that national coverage in place.
Good stuff. You've recently decided to form a strategic partnership with Peak. That was announced at your Capital Markets Day earlier in the year. Can you tell us why and what that means for the business?
I think the key thing is that we see them as a partner, not as a supplier. So you need to have that relationship that both parties have got some skin in the game. So the way that we did that was we had a number of meetings with Joe and Richard and sort of said, we want you to sit at the table with us, and you want you to be incentivized in the same way that we are. So we have some very clear guidelines on everything that these guys do is to drive EBITDA within Speedy. So if somebody comes and asks them to do something and we collectively believe it's not going to affect the EBITDA, we don't do it. So everybody's got the shared goal that we need to do it. And I think it's also important that we signed up for 5 years. It isn't one of these things that Rome wasn't built in a day. And the amount of time and effort it takes to get all of the data ingested between the two and get all the models working correctly. We've talked about machine learning, which is basically what it is rather than the full-blown AI, but it does get better over time, and you will only get better by investing the time and effort from the investment. So long-term, shared goals, and the ability to work as a partnership.
Definitely, and to build on that, I think you've implemented some really important levels of governance to make this partnership successful. And I mean, governance always sounds boring, but it is critical to everything that we're doing. So the first layer for me is the data governance. So Speedy have put in a huge amount of effort to get the whole business using the same instance of their ERP and then connecting that to their data warehouse. So there's a single source of truth for data, and they have automated monitoring built in there to make sure that the data stays of good quality, and a specialist like head of data governance to look after it as well. Linked to that, there's the project governance. Again, it might sound boring, but getting the basics right has been critical. So assigning internal drivers and approvers to each work stream so they explicitly understand who's responsible for delivering the result and when, and then this project level cadence rolls up into a management review every month and then exec review every quarter to make sure we remain on track. And finally, to wrap it all up, we have a really solid partnership scorecard for each of the initiatives. Every initiative has leading indicators, but the lagging indicator always links back to EBITDA, like Mark was explaining. And again, it's so important to get everyone on the same page about what we're optimizing for and why, and then it allows us to prioritize the items that really move the needle. There's always going to be a lot to do in a partnership like this, but having all of that laid out really gives everyone clarity and focus, and you can sort of see the signal from the noise. So final question, Mark. You successfully adopted AI. You're seeing those benefits, but we know from our conversations and from research that a lot of AI adoption programs fail. So what advice would you give to organizations looking to adopt AI?
Okay, so I think there's 5 points. The first one is focus your business on data and process compliance. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to have quality data that people can transact with. I have a data quality manager and a data governance manager that report directly to me, because that's how I see it as important within the organization. We have a process governance manager, again, reports to myself, because they're not responsible for all of the processes, but they are responsible for making sure that people have process governance embedded within all of the departments that create data within our organization. So the important bit is, if you don't have process compliance, you're going to generate poor data. So linking the two together was really important in my eyes. So that's point one. Second one is to educate the AI partner, the data scientists, on your business. It is very specific. You have to spend time with them to get them to understand the nuances, the challenges, the bespoke processes you have. I think they called it I couldn't say it. Simplicity, there's a fancy word. The individuality, I called it, in terms of your business. And spending time with the leaders of the partner and with the data scientists to really go into the detail of what that means is really important. The third one is, don't expect perfection immediately. You have to iterate. It will take time and it will take effort to do it. This thing just doesn't plug in and give you all the answers. It's a bit like a marriage, I think. You have to work at it and make sure that you spend a bit of time together before you realise you don't like each other. But, sorry, she's not listening. And it is a thing that machine learning, that's the whole concept of it. It does get better over time, so it's not going to be right on day one. The fourth one is to give the skeptics hard evidence. There will be skeptics out there, the naysayers. People say, you can't do this, you won't be able to achieve it, not in our business, we're different. You hear all of these things. You can't just say, trust me, it'll be right. You've got to give them the pure hard evidence that says, look, you said it's this is what the data says, why are you saying that? And once you get to that point, it will build the confidence. And if you haven't got the confidence, you'll get the door slammed in your face more times than you get it opened. So what we're trying to get is them trying to pull it off us rather than us push it onto them in terms of the demand. And as Joe said, we've got 6 modules now, 6 applications that traverses right across our organisation now to try and embed the different elements. And that's on the back of the success that people have seen by the ability to set the levels to correctly maximise our inventory. And the last one is to align the objectives of the AI partner with your own goals. If you have conflicting goals where the AI partner is trying to drive something specific in terms of the technology and you're trying to go in a different direction in terms of your business drivers, the two are going to collide and you're never going to work together. And I think we have that kind of relationship where we can openly say to each other, that's not working, turn it off, let's move on to the next thing. And having the alignment is really important for me.
Absolutely. There you go. Very practical and pragmatic advice from a very ambitious customer. So thanks for joining me today, Mark. Really appreciate that. I think it's time for lunch.
Thank you.
I've actually had a few audience questions. If you would like to answer them. One of them's even got a like. So I'll pass you that and take it away.
Please. The mic's still on. Cool. Okay, question number 1, which does have upvotes. Do Speedy now offer left-handed hammers?
What is it, sky hooks and left-handed hammers? No, fortunately we don't. Just a standard hammer.
There's 2 more here. So starting out on your AI adoption journey at Speedy, how did you think about ROI?
when we started out, the ROI was very clear, and the presentation that Richard gave back to us was very much that says, we believe you've got too much of this kit, and we believe you haven't got enough of this kit, and if you bought this kit and sold this kit, this is what it would do from the return on capital that we would have. So it was a very strong ROI. It's then when you get into the level of detail to try and actually work out what's the real return on investment is increased revenue, higher utilisation and lower net book value of kit, and trying to manage all of those levers rather than just the very simple one that we started out with was buy all this and sell all of that.
Yeah. So start with a strong business case, but then continue to peel back the onion as you keep going.
More granular detail, yeah.
I think something that we realised when we put together the strategic partnership was that investing a lot of time trying to attribute specific ROI back to the AI was a waste of time for both parties, and that's why we aligned everyone to the objective of EBITDA in the end.
Yeah, and what we're not going to do is come back and say to these guys, if we smash our EBITDA target, well, we can't actually say where you've impacted that, because all of these different things will overall improve the business performance.
Yeah. Cool. And last question, how did you change the skeptics and their mindset towards utilising data to drive better decision making? So the initial period would have been difficult before the leap of faith was made and accepted.
You've still got people who are skeptics, but the hard evidence can't be ignored. So when you show somebody, the example I gave you, why do you think you need 10 when you've only ever transacted more than 4 in one day? It just blows their argument out of the water. So you just sort of see them go, yeah, okay, you've got me. So it is absolute hard evidence that they need. And you will still have people who say, well, you don't take into consideration that they're just about to build a new football stadium next door. So I'm going to get all of the increased demand from that because you're only looking retrospectively. So you have to then give them the ability to influence the levels going forward based around what they know on top of the AI. So sort of bringing them and giving the ability to flex it a little bit, as well as giving them the hard evidence of what the data says, are the 2 points that make it sync with them. Yeah,
so we were very careful to build in sort of a human feedback loop to create a mechanism where they could challenge the level and then sort of have a consultation, and for that to be built in, although it doesn't get used too frequently now because they're pretty solid.
Yeah.
But they're nonetheless just to appease the skeptics.
Because somebody spoke, I think it was Richard put it on, where the very first slide around the machine learning, it's about AI is around, predictive AI is around taking history and predicting forward. So what we don't know is what has happened or what is going to happen in the future that is not connected to the history whatsoever, like the football stadium being built next door. So our Liverpool location has had a massive increase because of the Everton stadium that's being built at the moment just around the corner. We would never have seen that. All right, we know from ABI data, and you can filter those kind of things in, that says construction industry data tells us that these things are going to happen, but still there's the local knowledge that you can feed in.
Yeah, and that's going to lead into a new use case, right, of using Barber ABI data for that lead scoring and identification.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. I think it's definitely time for lunch now.